A lot of people are coming back to Destiny 2 right now. So today I'm going to go through a bunch of things that all returning players absolutely need to know about. Now, depending on when you last played, there is quite a bit of stuff to cover. In fact, I'd actually say that the game is completely unrecognizable if you haven't played for the past few years. My goal, though, is that by watching this video, you will at least gain a basic understanding of how the game works in the modern day. The first thing we should probably get out of the way is the pricing model and what you should buy in order to have the best experience. Destiny is a free-to-play game, technically speaking, but the expansions and the paid experiences are ultimately what you'll want if you are going to be playing this game for any length of time. You'll get access to a bunch of loot and like raids and dungeons and all of the best content that you wouldn't really be able to access if you were just a free-to-play player. But luckily for you as a returning player, Bungie has massively overhauled the pricing structure and the monetization of this game, and there is now just one bundle that you can buy that includes all of the past expansions together for one price. This is known as the Destiny 2 Legacy Collection 2024, and it comes out with the final shape. So if you want all of the content from the past, just get that. The one drawback with this, though, is it doesn't include the dungeons from Lightfall and Witch Queen, so you will need to go get the dungeon key separately if you want those, but that's like your lowest priority. The first thing you should definitely get is the final shape, and then you also should get the Legacy Pack just to get all of the past expansions. The dungeons are kind of like a nice thing you can add on if you become more of a dedicated player and you've been playing the game for a few months. You will also be getting certain dungeons like the Grasp of Avarice and the Shattered Throne. Those are included with the Forsaken Pack and the 30th Anniversary Pack, which are all included in the Legacy Pack. So if you just get the Legacy Pack, you'll have quite a bit of good stuff and plenty of dungeons and plenty of content to work through. As a side note for the future of the game, seasons are done. There's no more seasons. There is now this new system called episodes that are basically like seasons, but expanded and more interesting. So instead of having the 4 seasons per year that we've had in the past, we're now going to have 3 episodes. So hopefully that means that they'll get a little bit more attention and they'll be a little bit more expansive than seasons were. The episodes can be bought individually, or they come with the $100 version of the latest expansion. So based on all of that, my recommendation is get the latest expansion, Final Shape, and then get the Legacy Collection. That should include basically everything you will need as a returning player. The next thing we should discuss is a Pathfinder system, because this is a pretty big gameplay system that replaces a lot of things we've had in the past. For example, like bounties and patrols are basically being replaced with Pathfinder, and if you haven't played since 2017, the token system is long gone, but it is also essentially being replaced with Pathfinder. The overall system works as follows. You start out with this map, and your goal is to create a direct path from the left to the right. And you'll have like 6 nodes on the left, and as you go more and more to the right, you start getting like fewer and fewer options. So you will be more restricted in the objectives that you can do. Each node will have a specific objective that you have to complete, and they will get more challenging, and you'll also be forced to go to certain ones that you might normally not do. So one of the design goals of the Pathfinder was actually to kind of push players a little bit outside of their comfort zone in order to get them to do activities that are along the path towards the end. But it's also worth noting that if you really don't want to do an activity, like say there's a gambit node in there, you can go around it by creating a longer path and doing more other objectives instead. But the ultimate goal is to get from the left to the right and ultimately reach that loot, which is located on the right-hand side. Each node is similar to a bounty in that it will have a relatively easy objective for you to complete, and it will also give you a small amount of reward. So for example, it might give you some experience. But the main goal is to reach all the way to the right-hand side, where you can then claim the big loot, the big reward at the end. Once you have reached the end, you might want to reset your Pathfinder, but the other interesting thing is that at least on the Destination Pathfinder, you will get more rewards based on how many paths you have completed to the end. For example, if you complete 2 paths instead of just 1, you'll get almost double the loot, and as you can see with this table here, each additional path that you complete will give you more rewards. So you can also reset your Pathfinder once you've completed it all the way to the right with at least 1 path. But the thing is, you will actually get less rewards for subsequent completions of the Pathfinder after you've reset it. So for example, on your first 3 completions of the Ritual Pathfinder, you'll get a Prime Engram Enhancement Prism, 150 Bright Dust, and 25,000 XP. But after that, for your following 7 completions, you'll only get an Enhancement Prism, 150 Bright Dust, and 4,000 XP. So it's basically replacing the old system for the Ritual playlist where you would get a weekly objective that you can complete. But in this case, it's just like there's a weekly objective, you can reset it, you can do it 3 times, but then after that, you start getting less and less rewards. The other interesting thing is that your path is the same at the beginning of the week, but after you reset, you get a more randomized path. So you will not have the same path as every other player. You will not have the same objectives on your reset Pathfinder. At the weekly reset though, everyone's Pathfinder will reset, they'll reset all the rewards, you can start earning the highest tiers again, but everyone will also have the same objectives again for that first Pathfinder of the week. Pathfinder is a really good improvement because it's kind of similar to bounties, but it's just much better in every way. For example, it's infinitely repeatable, you can do it however much you want, and it's shared across all 3 of your characters, so you don't have to worry about doing any strange management of your inventory. The next topic to discuss is probably the reason why some of you quit the game, and that is sunsetting and the infamous DCV. Now, good news, or bad news, depending on how you look at it, weapon and armor retirement is now deleted. Yeah, that's no more. So all of your weapons from any period in Destiny history are now usable and can get up to the maximum power level. So if you have some weapon from vanilla, you can technically now use it, but the thing is that it's probably been power crept out of relevance. Like the new weapons are probably so much better than your old weapon that it's probably not worth using. But I say probably because there is a chance that you actually have one particular old weapon that is actually somewhat viable in the current sandbox. For example, my Duke, I'm probably going to be pulling out and using in PvP because it has some pretty interesting perk combinations. The next good news is that expansion, sunsetting, and vaulting has been removed. So, for example, old expansions were removed into the content vault, like for example, Forsaken no longer exists, but now current expansions will no longer be entering the content vault at any time ever. So that's good because it really sucked when you would buy an expansion and then a few years later it would just disappear. So anyway, this is kind of old news, but if you're a returning player, you might not know that they removed expansion sunsetting, so thumbs up to that. The seasonal/episodic sunsetting though does exist, so all seasonal stuff has been leaving the game once per year, and presumably the same might be true for episodes in the future as well. Next up is Guardian ranks. This is a relatively new system, and it's basically the ultimate progression and tutorial system that exists within the game. So if you're a new Guardian, you'll probably start out as a relatively low rank, but if you're returning, you might have some Guardian rank progress as well, depending on what you've completed on your account. So basically the Guardian ranks will demand that you do certain things in order to progress, and these things will start out by being extremely easy, so you should have no problem working through them at the beginning. You do need to get to like Guardian rank 5 or 6 in order to get like the basic stuff in the game. Because a lot of stuff will just be locked out to you if you don't have a few Guardian ranks. So just make sure you knock those out super easy at the beginning. But as you get further, as you get like above Guardian rank 7, 8, 9, those start becoming a little bit more difficult. But you do get more loadout slots, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So there is kind of a reason to do them, and they're also kind of bragging rights. But as long as you have like the basic level 6, that's basically all you technically need. If you don't want to go any further, you don't really have to. Story is an interesting topic that has changed quite a bit over the years, and some of it was sunset, unfortunately, and you can't play it anymore. However, they did add this new feature called the Timeline Reflections up in the right-hand corner of your director. You can go there to kind of relive parts of the story. You can actually go and launch old missions that were removed from the game. So you can kind of get like a recap of Forsaken, even though Forsaken is no longer in the game. If you want to do that, it's totally optional. But they also give like brief summaries. So if you missed out on, I don't know, season 15, you can go in there and get a brief summary of the different events that happened throughout the different expansions and the different seasons. I'd also say if you want to understand the modern story of the game, it is pretty important to understand like what we've done over the past 10 years. So I would highly recommend watching my video covering the entire story of Destiny. Now, it's only 40 minutes long. We condensed it and made it like really summarized. It's not like it's a 5-hour version of this, even though we are also making a 5-hour version. But if you want a recap, if you want it like condensed and summarized as much as possible, there's a 40-minute version on my second channel. You can go watch that. I would highly recommend if you want to understand what is actually going on in Final Shape and beyond. When it comes to the actual gameplay of these stories, there are some new systems for the campaigns that have changed things quite a lot. So for example, there's now the normal difficulty and the legendary difficulty. And the legendary difficulty is quite a bit harder, but it is actually quite popular. Most players, even casuals, will attempt the legendary difficulty, and although it does offer more of a challenge, it also offers more interesting rewards. So for example, once you reach the very end of the legendary campaign, you'll get armor that boosts you pretty significantly up in power level, so you can just skip some of the base power leveling process. Speaking of which, now is a good time to talk about leveling and power. So as I mentioned, you can get a big head start from the power boost of the campaign if you do it on legendary, but the next thing you'll want to do is go into your director and search for the powerful loot icons and do those. After that, the last step is to search for the pinnacles and do those. As of final shape, the power floor is 1900, the soft cap is 1940, the powerful cap is 1990, and the pinnacle/hard cap is level 2000. So really, you can do whatever you want until you reach the soft cap, and then the powerful cap is where you want to do the powerful rewards, and then up to the pinnacle cap is when you're going to want to do your pinnacle rewards. Another interesting and great quality of life update is we now have account-wide power. So instead of having to level up your hunter and then the next week go onto your titan and level up your titan starting from the very bottom by just switching your weapons, you can now just get the drops at the level of your main character. So whatever your main character is, whatever the highest power level on your account is, all of your other characters will get power drops at that same level automatically. So there's no need to go level up your other characters anymore. You can just play them and you will instantly start getting the drops at the highest level that exists on your account. Another great thing is there is now Fireteam power, which basically means if you are underleveled, but someone in your Fireteam is really high level, you will get boosted almost up to their level so that you can go do whatever activity they're wanting to do. So for example, if you have a friend who's obsessed with this game and he's power level 10 million and you are only power level 2, you can just join his Fireteam and you will get almost his power level of 10 million, just -5. Whoever is the highest power level in a Fireteam will become the power leader by default, and then everyone will just go 5 below their power. So it's great for people who are playing together and maybe are not the same power level, and they can still do relatively difficult activities together. Even though this system exists though, you still kind of need to do your power leveling though, because if you want to do something solo, you'll obviously not be able to rely on your Fireteam member. And then also 5 power level below does start to matter quite a bit in endgame content, so you'll want to be as high as you possibly can. The other thing is that if you are the power leader in your Fireteam, you'll get a commendation bonus, so that's kind of nice to have if you are the power leader. Speaking of commendations, these are basically things that you could hand out to your Fireteam members at the end of an activity, and it's basically just saying, nice job. These were not introduced until relatively recently, so you might not know about them. They're not super popular. I mean, people don't love them a lot, but basically it's just a way to pat your teammate on the back and say, good job. As a quick side note, I'd also say you definitely need to get Destiny Item Manager if this is something you're not familiar with. This is basically a website/extension that is extremely beneficial for you as a Destiny player. So if you need to move something from one character to the other, or grab something from the vault, or even like set up loadouts, you can do that all within DIM, and it's also really good for searching for stuff. Unfortunately, Destiny really does not have searching at all. You can't search your vault for a certain weapon. You can't type it in, but you can type it in on DIM. And they also have a bunch of filters, and there's tons of really complex features that you can go into depth over there with, but overall, I would highly recommend DIM if it's not something that you already do. It's basically required to play the game at any sort of a high level. But on the other hand, we also do have an in-game vault now. So instead of having to travel to the tower and load in for 10 years, you can now just go to orbit and you can press a certain key, whatever it says in the bottom left, and open up your vault. You can also actually do this if you are in an activity, if you are the Fireteam leader, by opening up your director, selecting an activity, and then that same little button will appear in the bottom left that tells you what to press to open your vault. So it's pretty cool that you can now actually access your vault from anywhere in the Destiny system, but it's still slightly limiting because you can't access your other characters, so you still kind of need DIM for stuff like that. The next thing that returning players definitely need to be aware of is the Fireteam Finder, because this basically gives you access to an in-game LFG to help you group up with other players, and it's extremely handy for literally anything that doesn't have matchmaking, or if you just want to play any random activity with another player. You can use this for literally whatever you can imagine. There's a whole list of banners that you can select for raids or nightfalls or Crucible or trials or whatever you want. You can use it and find other people to group up with. You can join a call with them or use the in-game voice chat, but a lot of them are also just no comms. You just join and run the activity almost as if it was using matchmaking. If you're getting into any of the more difficult endgame stuff though, people do tend to use voice channels or some other form of communication. So the big Destiny 2 LFG Discord is still relatively popular. And you can also join my Discord at discord.gg/shadowdestiny. And we do have a lot of people who are constantly playing together and just asking questions and learning about the game in there. Overall, though, Fireteam Finder is a great way to meet other players and join other players for various activities, and it's a great replacement to the Bungie.net version of the Fireteam Finder that we had in the past. And by the way, that has basically been overhauled and replaced with the actual in-game Fireteam Finder system. They're basically just linked together. Next up is Transmog, and this can be unlocked with a quest from Ada 1 in the tower, and it's basically centered around earning materials. So you can do these bounties. There's limited to 10 per class per episode/season, and these bounties can be spent to earn gear to unlock them, and then you get them as a universal ornament. The bounties are relatively easy, but it can be kind of a grind to do so many of them per season. But anyway, once you get them, you are able to spend them and unlock a piece of armor forever. So you basically just go into your customization screen, you unlock one of these ornaments, and now you can apply it to any of your armor for free forever. It is kind of overcomplicated in my opinion, but once you get the hang of it, you'll love being able to transmog your character and make them look really cool while still wearing your highest stat armor that also has your coolest appearance. The one drawback is you cannot transmog your exotics because Bungie wants them to remain recognizable and unique. So the only thing you can do for your exotics, I guess, is just put on their shaders and their own exotic ornaments. But you can't put a legendary piece of armor onto an exotic because that would compromise its identity. The next thing is loadouts. These are extremely cool and extremely convenient, and I am just sad we didn't get these on day one of Destiny 1 because this is such a good feature and it's been extremely popular in the community. Loadouts basically let you swap from one complete loadout to another complete loadout in 0.1 seconds just by clicking one button on the left of your character screen. So these will save all of your weapons, all of your armor, all of your mods, your subclasses, all your subclass customization. It even saves your transmog. So you can switch from one thing to another super fast, super easy, super efficiently. You can also change the name and the icon and the color of your loadouts on the left, so it's kind of to help make them a little bit more recognizable. So for example, you might have like a Trials loadout and a normal Crucible loadout and a Nightfall loadout and a, I don't know, Raid loadout. So you can have a bunch of different options here, and you will unlock more slots for your loadouts as you progress in your Guardian ranks. The one shortcoming is that your loadout does not save your artifact perk selections, so you will have to actually customize those manually, but we will get more into the artifact perks in a little bit. If you haven't played in a while, they have completely overhauled the way that weapons and weapon slots work. So instead of having like double primary or a primary, a special, and a heavy, you can now just customize those in basically any order that you want, except for your heavy. Your heavy option will always remain in the heavy slot, but you can now run 2 specials in the first 2 slots, or double primaries if you want, or 1 special and 1 primary, or a primary in the first slot and a special in the second slot. You can do any combination of those that you might want. However, the one thing I would say is most people would not recommend running double primary in PvE. You probably want to have 1 primary and 1 special because they kind of fulfill different roles in the sandbox. Your primary is normally, there are some exceptions, but your primary is normally meant for taking out the adds, and your special is normally meant for taking out the slightly more beefy enemies, and your heavy is for bosses and extra beefy enemies. There are certain like weapons that break those exceptions. For example, like a Forbearance grenade launcher is really good for ad clear, but for the most part, those rules hold true. Even though the first 2 slots on your character are not restricted to an ammo type, they are restricted to the elements. So for example, your kinetic slot, your top slot, will have kinetic, stasis, and strand. And then in your second slot, you will have solar, arc, and void. Weapon crafting is an extremely important system that basically allows you to get the best weapons in the game with the exact perks that you want. As you play, you'll notice that you get these red border drops. So basically they're just normal weapons, except they are included with a pattern, and these just drop based on RNG. So once you get these red border weapons, you'll want to head into the inspection screen and extract their patterns, or you can also just dismantle them, and that will automatically extract the pattern as well. Once you get a certain number of patterns, it's normally 5, you can then head over to the Enclave and start crafting some of the best weapons in the game. You get to pick the exact perks that you want, so it basically just removes RNG and gives you access to some incredible perfect rolls. Once you craft a weapon here in the Enclave, you'll need to level it up to a certain level and then return to reshape it to unlock all of the perks. And also, once you get to a certain high level, you can also get enhanced versions of the perks, which are basically like just slightly better than the normal version of the perks. Also, not every single weapon is craftable, so if you don't see it dropping with red borders, and if you don't see it listed under the patterns in your inventory and in your menu, then that weapon is probably not craftable. However, as of final shape, every single weapon that drops will either be craftable or enhanceable. So if you get a random roll weapon that is not craftable, you'll still be able to enhance the perks on it and get access to those enhanced versions of the perks that I just mentioned. If you haven't played since like 2019, then you might not be familiar with finishers. These are basically like really good moves that allow you to instantly defeat any low health enemy. And they also have tons of synergy with exotics and fragments and other perks, so finishers can be extremely useful, especially in endgame content. As for the PvP side of the game, we have actually gotten quite a few substantial updates in the past few years. So we've had huge iterations and improvements, and especially now that we have a PvP strike team, which is like a dedicated team that's actually working on improving PvP, things are surprisingly good nowadays. If you're someone who is interested in Trials of Osiris, it is now the easiest it has ever been by far to go flawless. The Mercy card will now give you 2 Mercies, so you can actually lose twice and still go flawless, even though that isn't actually flawless. But yeah, Trials has been massively improved and overhauled over the years, and it's in a pretty solid state as of now. There's also been quite a lot of experimentation with the sandbox and updating the game to feel more interesting and less ability spammy. For example, we now have a mode called Hardware where it actually removes all the abilities. This is something that certain people have been asking for years. So if you're someone who doesn't like spamming abilities in Crucible, you can now go into Hardware and just duel with your weapons, which is extremely refreshing. You don't have to do that though, you can just play the normal modes, which will all have abilities and cooldowns as normal. But the good thing is that we're now getting more frequent balance updates. Like I know in the past we waited literally a year for Shadow Dive and Stasis to get nerfed, but nowadays stuff is getting patched and addressed a little bit more rapidly, which is great to see. If you're someone who doesn't really love PvP, but you still want to get the loot from PvP, also good news for you. Trials loot is way more accessible than it has been in the past. You don't actually have to go flawless to get the loot. You can just play a few games and you still get rewarded. Same goes for Iron Banner. I mean, you don't have to be an incredible PvP player to get access to the Iron Banner loot. And lately it's been dropping some pretty incredible loot like Tusk of the Boar, for example. Another thing for returning players is the Monument to Lost Light in the tower. This is basically legacy stuff that is still available, but it was originally sourced from content that was removed from the game. So if, for example, you didn't finish some exotic quest that was removed from the game, you can now just go buy that weapon from the monument in the tower. Currencies. So a lot of currencies have been either reworked or just removed from the game. Like for example, legendary shards are now just gone as of final shape, and planetary materials were just removed a long time ago. If you go into your inventory or the vault, you'll probably notice that you have a lot of unused destination materials or just old materials or like quest items from a really long time ago. If it says on them that you can delete them, like for example, like old mods really don't have a purpose anymore. So if it says that you can delete them, you probably can just delete them. You can also bring certain ones to Rahul if they say that you can bring them to Rahul. So you can go and exchange them for some currency if you want. Buildcrafting is an incredibly important topic in the modern game, and over the years it has become more and more of a focus in Destiny. So if you're not very familiar with buildcrafting, this is an incredibly important section for you. There is now this like nice side menu that allows you to view all of the mods at a glance while doing your builds, as well as select different items and make changes to your loadout. The Subclass 3.0 system was created and introduced with Stasis, but over the years they have applied that to all of the other subclasses and elements as well. So there's no more of the tree system, there's no more of that big flood of icons that we had in Destiny 1. Now everything operates based on this system where you can select your super, you can select your class item, you can select or your class ability, you can select your jump, you can select everything all at once in this one big system. Another interesting change that came with this system is grenades being universal across the classes, so everyone now has access to all of the grenades. Within this system, the things called aspects are like the big modifiers, the ones that have a big impact, and they are unique to your classes. And then below the aspects, you also have these other things called fragments, and they are shared between all of the different classes, so everybody's are the same. The fragments are important for further expanding your abilities and triggering different verbs, like weakening targets or giving restoration or freezing enemies. They can also sometimes be used to give limited versions of some of the other classes' abilities. For example, like Devour is probably best on Warlocks, but it can also be used in a limited way for Hunters and Titans if they build into it with their fragments. Continuing on the topic of build crafting, armor and armor mods have also been massively overhauled in the past few years. So, for example, like we used to have solar chest plates or like, a solar element on your armor or void or whatever, but it's now just universal. All of the armor is the same and all of the mods can go onto any type of armor. There are still certain restrictions, like for example, your scavenger mod can only go on your boots, it can't go on your helmet. But other than that, you can put any mod wherever you want. There's now a much more simplified version of the older systems like Elemental Wells and Charge with Light. Those are basically all just gone and replaced with a new system called Armor Charge. The easiest way to get an Armor Charge is probably just to pick up an Orb of Power or an Orb of Light for those of you who really haven't played in a long time, but you can also do some other ways like equipping a Finisher mod. Once you get the Armor Charge, those are basically used to buff certain parts of your build. So for example, if you want to deal a lot of damage to a boss, a Surge mod is really popular in PvE because it will buff your damage overall. Many other mods will just work passively though, so you can just kind of equip them and forget about them and they will just passively buff your build. For example, Siphon mods will just give you Orbs of Power when you get eliminations with a certain element of weapon. And by the way, Masterworks giving Orbs of Power is no longer a thing, that got removed. So Siphon mods is now the new way of doing that. Next up is artifact mods, and these are incredibly important and powerful for basically any type of activity. Basically, you will unlock points to spend on your artifact as you gain experience, and then as you choose perks in each column, you will slowly begin to unlock the other columns, which have progressively more interesting perks. The important thing to know about the artifact is that all artifact mods that you unlock are always applied for free and forever. The artifact does get removed and replaced at the end of every episode/season, but for the duration of the season, you will have all the perks that you have unlocked all the time. These can be really critical for doing things like stunning champions, which are very present in basically all endgame content. So for example, if you were to unlock the anti-barrier mod for a certain type of weapon, that basically becomes essential for dealing with the anti-barrier champions. You can hover over these icons on your character screen to see which type of champions you are currently equipped to deal with, and also when you select an activity, you can hover over these icons to see which type of champions exist within the activity. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, if you've been on a break and you're just jumping back in, but you haven't played all of the past seasons and story and expansions, you're probably going to be pretty lost as to what is happening in the current story of the game. That is why I highly recommend watching this video right here that covers the entire story of Destiny, from the very origins of the universe all the way up to the present day. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.